Okay, let's jump into it and folks will join. My name is Sarah Clements. I'm a vice president for state government relations at McGuireWoods Consulting. We're a government affairs consulting and lobbying firm across the country, and I am in Tallahassee, Florida. I'm super excited to be hosting and moderating this panel. We have a really good discussion for you guys, I think, about the growing demographics around homeschooling, microschooling, all of these different alternative education models that more and more families are choosing, especially in the last 3 to 5 years, choosing outside of the traditional public charter and even private schools around the country. So just a little housekeeping. You should be able to write any questions that you have throughout the webinar, and then we will end and give ourselves enough time to answer those questions at the end of the webinar. So please write those as you think of them. And I'm going to turn it over to Travis to introduce yourself, and then Tay and Nathan.
Hi, good afternoon. It's great to be with y'all. My name is Travis Pillow. I am Director of Thought Leadership at Step Up for Students. We are the largest administrator of 6 different scholarship programs in the state of Florida that provide different education options to students. In my role as Director of Thought Leadership, I'm really focused on, first of all, communicating out lessons from Florida on the benefits of school choice and how to implement these programs effectively. And then second of all, as more and more states sort of jump on the school choice bandwagon, create new programs, what lessons can Florida learn from those other states about how do we support innovative education options and how do we make those accessible to students and families?
Sarah, thank you so much for hosting this great event today. My name is Tay Marie Adams. I go by Tay. I am the Executive Director of Grants and Scholarships for an organization called Merit. And that division is what the ESA programs or microgrant work. They all fall under that umbrella. I've spent a decade in the nonprofit K-12 education space prior to joining Merit, and we are currently administering an ESA program in Ohio and a microgrant program in Kansas.
And I'm Nathan Hoffman. I'm the Senior Director for State Policy and Advocacy at the Foundation for Excellence in Education, also shorthand known as ExcelinEd. I oversee our work in the state of Florida, as well as 2 national policy networks. I've spent the better part of the last 8 or 9 years in various roles across the country, pursuing school choice policy and actually implementing it on the scholarship granting side as well. Thanks for having me, Sarah.
And I should know what I didn't say in my bio is I started as a K-12 public school teacher, worked at ExcelinEd for 3 years doing legislative and external affairs, and then went to Step Up for Students for 3 years doing the same thing. So I've spent a lot of time in educational choice space, and now working at McGuireWoods, we represent companies that do curriculum, professional development, all these types of services and products that we're talking about now, how they can access these programs or access the families that are utilizing these programs. It's kind of all coming full circle. That's why I'm excited to talk about this. I think to start with, so there's some terms we've thrown out like microschooling, pods, ESAs. I'm going to turn it to Travis to give us a little bit of an overview of what these models are, and then share with us, when we say we have this massive shift towards homeschooling and these different personalized models, what does that actually look like in terms of numbers across the country?
Great, thank you, Sarah. So I think what we're really doing in Florida right now is working on a shift towards supporting families at scale that is creating an opportunity for new innovators and educators and publishers to reach families directly in a way that I think is new to a lot of them. But what we're hoping is that the changes that we're seeing underway are going to unleash a lot more innovation and entrepreneurship in public education. So I think the first trend to really focus on here is the fact that the number of homeschoolers just in our state of Florida for the past 5 years has been if you counted it as a school district, would be in the top 10 in our state. And that number has continued to grow rapidly. You see this major plateau jump that occurred in that 2020 school year during the height of the COVID pandemic. But I think the other key thing to see in Florida is that there was no, return to normal after pandemic. We had a lot of families that during the pandemic pulled their kids out of school, went into the business of educating their own children themselves, and they have not gone back. And in fact, those homeschooling numbers have only continued to increase. So that's a significant shift in sort of who is doing, just who the education market sort of looks like. This is a group of families that probably were not ideologically opposed to public school, but they chose homeschooling because they wanted something different from their kids. They wanted more control. They wanted more personalization. Perhaps they wanted just more time at home or more direct parental involvement in the learning experience. But what those numbers do not include are a growing number of options that blurred the lines. So in my prior role before joining Step Up recently, I was a researcher at the Center on Reinventing Public Education.
Travis,
yeah.
Can you advance to the next slide?
Yes. Are you on? Do you see?
Okay. Can you go back to the chart real quick? Because we were just seeing the title page.
My mistake.
Just so everyone can see the growth.
Okay. So here we see the increase in homeschooling in the state of Florida and the plateau shift during the pandemic. But what these numbers do not include is the growing number of options that blur the lines between schooling and homeschooling. And so this is a rise in micro schools, learning pods, and these definitions kind of blur a little bit. A lot of times they're considered a sort of private education option. There are also school districts and charter schools that are creating these small learning communities. A lot of times, but not always, they are small groups that meet maybe 10 students or so with one adult educator. A lot of times, but not always, they leverage online learning software or curriculum. What my work during the pandemic as a researcher with the Center on Reinventing Public Education, we looked at some of the parents who created learning pods during the pandemic. Maybe don't show up directly in the homeschool data, but what they did was they started operating sort of living room laboratories in sort of education innovation, where they were directly providing learning experiences to their children. And a lot of parents who had that experience enjoyed that experience and didn't want to go back. And so we've seen in some recent headlines in the Wall Street Journal, Christian Science Monitor, talk about this new trend in this growth of small learning communities that a lot of times stretch our traditional definition of what a school can be or what a school is. And what's happening in Florida right now is the growth of scholarship programs that can make these types of innovative learning options more accessible to all families. These numbers for the 23-24 school year really show that we are approaching now almost 300,000 Florida students who are using our different scholarship programs. But the other big change is part of HB 1, a major policy supported by our governor, policy change supported by our governor legislature. Number one, every student is eligible for a K-12 scholarship worth almost $8,000. Number two, all of those scholarships are now flexible funding, where parents can use their scholarship to access a private school of their choice, but they can also use the funding in that scholarship to pay for tutors, to pay for therapy, to pay for curriculum that they supply themselves. And so what we're looking at is sort of a major shift in the education marketplace. If you look at our scholarship programs last year, before that major change in the major expansion of our scholarship programs, we were serving about 250,000 students. If you counted those students as a school district, they would be about the 7th largest in the country, almost as large as Broward. The growth this year, we're still, firming up some of the numbers, but it's going to look like probably we're going to be rivaling, Chicago Public Schools or Miami-Dade in terms of the scale of the scholarship programs in Florida. And that's not counting, for example, our reading scholarship, which is a scholarship just for public school students that allows them to provide to receive supplemental services, textbooks, other curriculum and support with reading specifically. To make all this work at scale, what we've done at Step Up is we've created My Scholar Shop. It is an interface where parents can go and connect directly with vendors to purchase pre-approved curriculum and supplies. So this has managed a transaction volume of almost $81 million last school year. Again, that's before the growth that's happening this year. 73 different service providers. That includes publishers like Scholastic. That includes entities like Best Buy, where we kind of handpicked education related items that they have to sell, where families can go and browse around. That $80.1 million mostly just includes curriculum and instructional supplies that families are purchasing. It does not include school tuition. It does not include tutoring or therapy, some of the larger expenses that families make, which we provide reimbursement or direct payment for those providers. But so that gives us a sense of sort of the scale and the rapid growth that we're seeing in this segment of the marketplace. And what I would argue is that this has great implications for education innovation. I want to highlight one of these providers here, Guidepost Montessori. They are part of the higher ground sort of family of education options. And they provide services directly to homeschoolers that allow them to basically create Montessori programs in their living rooms. But, this same organization also operates Montessori schools throughout Florida, private preschools, as well as K-12 schools, mostly in South Florida right now. And it's part of a growing trend in education where we're seeing entities that function as service providers to schools. They maybe operate schools themselves directly, and they also serve families directly. And so I think the sort of sea change that this represents in public education is that right now, if you have an innovative math program, an innovative reading program, you either have to start your own school and find ways to solve all those problems, run a transportation network, run a lunch program, and serve families that way, or you have to sell to schools, and schools become a gatekeeper in terms of what you're able to offer to parents. Now, there's a variety of different ways for innovation education options to reach the market, and we're seeing, a growing number of entities. Florida Virtual School, for example, they serve some families directly and offer courses directly. They also sell services to schools, helping them implement virtual programs. But then they also operate schools themselves and essentially function as a district. And I think these types of models where new organizations work directly with families and have direct relationships with some of their customers, but then also work in a way that's more traditional in education, selling to schools and systems, is kind of what we're seeing in the education market of the future. And what this shift is going to mean is it's going to mean more innovative options are accessible to more students and more families. That's sort of the story that we're seeing in Florida. But if you zoom out, this is a change that's sweeping the country. And I think Nathan can tell us more about that.
Just a quick a note on that. So Travis, you mentioned, Florida specifically. So 2018-19, there were 97,000 students enrolled as homeschoolers. 22-23, which is the last year we have data, last school year is 154,000. That's almost a 60% increase in 4 years. And if you look at that number and you're looking at the National Center for Education Statistics data, which ranks school districts across the country in terms of enrollment, that's approximately the size of Dallas ISD, which is the 16th largest district in the country. And that's just Florida homeschoolers, which also would be about the 6th largest district in Florida. So that's just one state. And I think Florida is one of the higher states in terms of homeschoolers. But just to kind of give you a sense, I also was looking at the National Home Education Research Institute. It's easier. Nathan's going to talk a little bit about numbers in terms of ESAs. It's easier to figure out how many students are in an ESA, like concrete data, because you either have an education savings account through a program or you don't. the laws around homeschooling are a little bit, varied by state. And so it's a little bit harder to estimate, what is homeschooling and how is that defined. But they estimate in the 21-22 school year, there were more homeschool students than Catholic school students across the country, and slightly fewer homeschool students than public charter school students in the whole country. So I think that's a pretty massive amount of kids that we're talking about nationwide. So, we talked about these alternative models and we're kind of lumping them all together, but really education savings accounts are unique in that, micro schooling, homeschooling, pods, these are really more of the how you're educating your child and what you're doing with your kids. And anyone can really go find a micro school, find a co-op, find a pod, or you can start one. They're pretty unregulated by the government, whereas ESAs, you actually have a policy change that has to take place. The legislature has to pass a law, and it's really more of a financial mechanism for parents to pursue the type of educational option they want. And for some parents, they may be able to pay for a micro school tuition using their education savings account. So I'm going to turn it to Nathan and have you share a little bit about what the trends look like as far as states passing ESAs, what are the bigger states, and kind of where has that been going?
Sure, happy to. And let me just say, we coming out of the pandemic in 2021, we called it the year of school choice, something on the order of 20 or so states passed or expanded school choice programs. What we're saying now about 2023 is it was the year of universal school choice. You saw a number of states, including Utah, Florida, who was already mentioned by Travis, Arkansas, Iowa, Indiana passed a near universal voucher program, but several more states pass these programs and say we're going to make them, at least on the eligibility side, available to every student in the state. And what that's done is just, Travis talked about scale a little bit in Florida, but it's just that financial mechanism that the state provides has just allowed for this massive scaling effect to happen. I think I pulled some numbers yesterday on what we have. And if you look at it just in Iowa, whose application opened only maybe 2 months ago at this point, there's been 18,000 applications that have been approved. That's up from zero prior to when they had the law. So that's a large scaling effect. Arizona, more than 64,000 applications. They previously passed universal school choice prior to this year, but you're still seeing that kind of more immediate scaling effect. And of course, in Florida, where there's Travis knows the numbers better than I do, but north of approaching or north of 400,000 applications that have been approved across all of their programs. So the universal nature of these programs allows for scaling that creates this marketplace effect that we all have talked about wanting to have, because it gives parents a good amount of money to use on not just private school tuition. So they're not just taking it and giving it straight to a Catholic school or straight to some kind of independent private school. They're going out, they're buying tutoring services, they're buying therapeutic services, they're buying after school programs. So you're really opening up an entire marketplace that parents are able to sort of pick and choose what they want to customize their child's education. So in a way, it's also an economic development tool, I would argue. So that's what we're starting to see. The big question mark right now, we talked about a little bit before the webinar began, which is what's going to happen in Texas. All eyes have been on Texas. Over the last several years, they're one of the few holdout kind of center-right states that have not passed any type of private school choice program or ESA program. They've got some issues that they're trying to tie up in a special session at this point, but we expect that by year's end, they will pass some version of a school choice program. I'm not sure that it's going to be universal in scale, but as you bring on the Texas marketplace, now you're talking about one of the largest states in the country that will now have a marketplace open to private education options. So that will certainly add to the scale of these programs overall. I do think the trend will continue. once you start, it's difficult to stop, except if you are in my state of Illinois. But in most places outside of the state of Illinois, once you start, it's difficult to stop. And I think we will only continue to see more money invested into these programs over time, and more students and families who ultimately decide to take that leap, grab an ESA, grab a scholarship, and start to customize their child's education.
Thanks, Nathan. And let me pause for a second, and just for, I think most of us in this call are fairly familiar with ESAs at this point, but if you're not, the financial mechanism we're talking about is the state providing families that are eligible with some percentage of the amount of funding they would normally get, that a public school would normally get for that child. So maybe 90% of the funds that a public school would get to educate that child, it's now going into an account that is often held by a nonprofit or for-profit entity that's contracted with the state. And so that entity is in charge of, overseeing the application process and eligibility process and approving those, but also controlling and verifying that the expenses those parents are making are appropriate and within the bounds of the law. And every state is different. And you mentioned, and Travis mentioned, the ESAs generally do include private school tuition. So in Florida, and it probably in most states, a large number of students, maybe even a majority of students, are happy with taking that ESA and just going to a private school. And they are essentially using it as a voucher or a scholarship, and they may not spend anything outside of that school tuition. But they have the option, in Florida, because we have a couple of, it's actually very confusing. We have so many different programs and they've changed names over the years, but, we have a special needs scholarship, special needs ESA that has a huge variation in the types of expenses that are allowed. But, families can purchase therapies, they can purchase assistive, technology and a wide variety of things with that. And so it does allow parents to really customize their educational options. So on that note, I want to turn it over to Tay, because Merit is one of these administrators, and let her share a little bit about Merit and what these programs actually look like for parents and also for vendors who want to participate in these programs.
Thanks, Sarah. So I can quickly tell you just a little bit about Merit, but I'm actually excited to show you what an education marketplace looks like. I know that Travis had talked a little bit about the marketplace that Step Up has, but in a nutshell, Merit, we're a mission-driven for-profit organization. We're about 7 years old. Our interest in the ESA micro grant space started during the pandemic, when we saw a lot of programs being implemented in states primarily to address learning loss. But we knew that this was going to be a trend that was going to continue. It very much also mirrors a trend. We do some work in the workforce and higher education space of that customization. And one of the reasons that we were interested in this is because in large part, a lot of these programs are new and, they're being passed by state legislators. And because it's landing in the laps of maybe a Department of Education or a state treasury department that might not be equipped to implement these programs quickly, we knew that we had that sweet spot. At Merit, one of the things that we do is eligibility verification. A lot of these programs are income-based, and so we can help with that verification piece. But then there's so much more. There's new, we know that these programs are popular, but we also know that marketing is a huge component. Families need to know that this is an option, and so that's one of the things that Merit can do. And then one of the other things that we do is we take the eligibility verification to make sure that people are matched with opportunities. And so that's where the marketplace comes in. And so what I would actually like to show you is what Sarah was saying is what it actually looks like for the families that are being served, and then also an education marketplace. Let me see if I can share my screen. There we go. So I'm hoping that this will actually share the website that I have. Okay, of course this is going to happen. It is not allowing me to share my screen right now because I have to do a system configuration. So Sarah, is there any way that you could just go to keep.chaos.gov Sorry to do it that way, but I really want to show everybody the marketplace because I think it really gives a visual of what that direct access for family looks like.
Tell me that website again.
It is keep, so keep.ks.gov. And then we can bring that up. But while Sarah is pulling up the website, and I'm so sorry to do that to you and to throw this on you, one of the things that I wanted to mention is that in Ohio, our education marketplace has over 1,000 businesses and education service providers. They're a mix of local businesses, a mix of those bigger technology providers like Staples, Best Buy. And then we're going to go to the Kansas website. Is that showing right now? Perfect. Do you mind scrolling down to ready to use your Keep award and finding the service providers? Great. Can everybody see the marketplace?
Okay, I was muted. Where am I clicking?
Oh, so if you can go down to
Find service providers.
Yep.
There we go.
Great. So can you see the marketplace now? Fantastic. So this just gives you an overview of where families are directly connected with these education service providers. One of the things that we wanted to make sure is that it's user-friendly. And so you can search by the category that you're looking for, whether it's tutoring, whether it is curriculum and technology, and then also search by location. And so you can easily be matched through, and then you can also click through so you can go directly to that business. A lot of the businesses and education service providers on the marketplace will take direct pay, so it does not have to come right out of the family's wallet for reimbursement. And then one of the other things that we wanted to do is just make sure that it's an easy platform for families. So it's app-based. And so you are able to submit those reimbursements and get connected with those educational services very quickly. And then one of the things that I just wanted to add a few additional states where we see growth and we're interested. I know we've talked a little bit about Utah and Texas. South Carolina is also introducing an ESA program that's coming. We're expecting to see that RFP any day. Arkansas has recently introduced an ESA program. Next year, we also expect to see a program in North Carolina. And so the growth is really, it's moving so fast. And so it's such an exciting field.
And I wanted Tay, on here to be able to share that, because when kind of how this webinar actually came about is over the years, as I've talked to my clients, many of whom have sell instructional materials or professional development, curriculum, assessments, all these things, and they have a sales team that works with districts or individual charter schools or private schools, and they do not have a way currently to sell direct to consumer, to sell to individual families or even teachers. This idea of a teacher spending account is new, but that's been floating around the country for a few years. And our commissioner of education in Florida, when he was a state senator, filed a bill to create this pilot program where every teacher in Florida would get a $500 teacher spending account. And you could use that $500 for the professional development you want. If you wanted to go be certified in a particular methodology for how to teach reading, you could do that. You could go earn these micro credentials in the areas that you want, and you get to keep that and take that to the next school that you teach at. And hopefully, y'all can't hear the thunder and lightning that's happening in Tallahassee right now. So an easy way, I realize we're talking about big companies and you're moving from a B2B to a B2C sales model. That's not an easy thing to just, flip a switch and you have a different type of model. But an easy way to do that is for providers to partner with a Merit, with a Step Up for Students. There's other groups out there, ClassWallet, Odyssey, Students First Technologies, these administrators that are out there partnering with states. And if you get on this platform, Merit's platform, My Scholar Shop through Step Up for Students, you suddenly have access to every family in that ESA program. We're talking about hundreds of thousands. I mean, we're going to have 1 million students in ESAs probably in the next, 5 years. And so that's an easy way for you to give families direct access to your programs.
Sarah, can I add something really quickly?
Yeah.
You brought up a really good point. One of the things that we were seeing, and we've only been doing this work for about 2 years now, is that businesses are starting to reach out to us proactively. And so I think that the knowledge and the impact of, one, on your business bottom line, but two, a lot of our partners on the education marketplace, and Travis, I feel like you're probably seeing the same thing, really want to impact students. And so it's not just about, that financial model, it's really about that impact and having that direct access to families. And I think Travis, during one of our prep calls, you had also mentioned just being able to get that feedback from families also as a business is also a different model that is really impactful. And in Kansas specifically, we have gotten some feedback from some of the vendors on the website, especially smaller businesses, that they've actually had to scale up to help meet the demand and serve the families that are being driven to them through the KEEP program and the marketplace.
And I would add to that, I think that homeschooling looks very different now than it did, 10, 20, 30 years ago. And when those of us in this call, when we were kids, I think homeschool families, by and large, were looking for something very different from what the typical public school was doing, and maybe they wanted to, some religious education or just a very different type of curriculum. And so they were looking for homeschool curriculums and instructional materials that were created by homeschoolers for homeschoolers. I think now, especially since the pandemic, there's a growing number of families who they're not, they don't necessarily want to something completely different. I mean, they may want materials and textbooks and programs that are familiar to them. They just want a more flexible way of educating their child. They don't necessarily want to go to a school for 6 hours a day. They want to be able to take a virtual course and go to a co-op or go to a micro school or teach some things themselves, but they want to be able to kind of bundle these services. And right now, you go on My Scholar Shop, you go on Merit, you will not see any of the major publishers and assessment companies because they have not partnered with these administrators. And so I think there is a huge opportunity for edtech, for publishers, for professional development providers. Parents who are teaching their kids may want professional development. We don't necessarily call it that, but if you want to teach your kid how to read, just like a teacher needs to understand the science of reading, a parent does too. And so I think there's these huge opportunities that if we realize that, families are looking for different things and they like to be able to go on My Scholar Shop, go on Merit, go on Class Wallet and see names that they recognize, not just curriculum and things that are for homeschool.
Sarah, can I just add just a couple things in there? One, I would say, one of the beauties, I guess, intentional beauties of these ESA programs is when we talk about administrators, and we are talking about these not-for-profit in most cases, but there are some for-profits out there. We're not talking about state government necessarily. These groups are like Merit Technology, Step Up for Students are intermediaries. So for companies, for organizations, for providers who are looking to enter the marketplace, it's not as if you will have to go into some crummy state office building and fill out a bunch of paperwork. This is more modernized. And I think as we continue to see more families utilizing these programs, as more money is invested, as more time goes on, I think it's going to become, you're going to see more and more companies and providers come onto these platforms because in a way it's a bit of a cultural change too that's just it is accelerating at this point through the funding of these ESA programs. But as more and more families get comfortable choosing options outside of just paying tuition and maybe some tutoring. We call it like tuition tutoring technology. As you go beyond that and you start talking about perhaps families are partnering with entities that provide some type of summer sports programming that the family would otherwise not be able to access, or something like that that's more less conventional than just your typical academic providers. I think you'll start to see these processes become more efficient, and it'll become even, it'll be just as easy for a provider to access these programs as it is for a family currently.
Yeah, and one thing I can say to sort of build on that is, so, we've shared some numbers out of Florida, basically on the idea that we've awarded more than 400,000 scholarships to families. So far, we're approaching about 300,000 of those families that have enrolled in an option of their choice. And so there's this gap of about 100,000. And those numbers are still moving a little bit, and they're going to firm up over the next couple of weeks. But what that gap really means is that there's tens of thousands of families in this state who have received a scholarship and who have not yet found the provider that meets exactly their needs to utilize that scholarship. And so we have kind of a need in Florida to invite and attract more private schools to expand, but also more new innovative providers to come and serve families. And I think that one big sort of gap in the marketplace right now, if you look at our existing sort of marketplace in My Scholar Shop, you will see a lot of basically by and large, most of the vendors fall into one of two categories. Either along the lines of what Sarah was talking about, they're entities that grew up to serve the homeschool market, or they're entities that like Scholastic Books, for example, that we all know that are used to having that direct to consumer relationship. And one of the big gaps in the marketplace right now are entities like the College Board, entities like ACET, entities like Zern or Lexia, that have a lot of name brand recognition for parents, quality respected providers. But and parents can procure services from these groups right now and apply for reimbursements. But the more we can place them directly in our marketplace and have that seamless transaction for families, that's going to increase the quality of the offerings available in our scholarship program and increase families' sort of confidence in these programs' ability to meet their needs, because they recognize these providers as sort of the sources of quality learning opportunities that they want.
Yeah, and I think I do think we all are, have the same mission of connecting high quality materials and educational models to families. But if you're a company, you also have a bottom line. And I think that the companies or the organizations that get in front of this will have, more market share. And Tay, you had a good example of, why don't you share that about the laptops? I thought that was really good.
Yeah. And so we've seen that. And as I mentioned, as we've gotten deeper in our 2 years of doing this work, more companies are reaching out to us proactively. But in the beginning, there was one company in particular that reached out to us. They were ready to go. And in the back end, we were reaching out to a whole bunch of other companies trying to explain what ESAs are, how the marketplace works. And this company, because they were ready to go, they were one of the first technology providers on the education marketplace. And not surprisingly, that's where a lot of families wanted to spend, some of their money. And so they were really able to benefit the bottom line of the organization, and then also with the families that they were able to serve, just because they were ahead of the game. One of the other things that they were able to do, and I think you had mentioned this, Nathan, is you're not going into what might feel like a black hole of government and trying to figure out how things are, working in a lot of regulations. You're dealing with, nonprofits or a company like Merit, where you're talking to a real person. You can also influence the process because this is new enough. And so you can talk about what's working for you as a company, how we can streamline it for you and make it a little bit easier. And so I think that technology provider example is a really good one, because they saw the opportunity, they moved quickly, and we were able to see in the numbers and the families that were being served, that impact that it had on the company. And then also, of course, those families and kids.
Yeah. And the easier we can make things for families, the better. I mean, that's one of the great things about an ESA is that hopefully you don't have to spend any money out of pocket. If we can provide options where parents can take money out of their account, it's debited out of their account and the administrator pays the company directly. That's one less step, for the parents. But it's, kind of talking about the old, I don't want to say old school because it's the current model now, but selling, to districts I think companies have just had this, traditional way of thinking. Travis and I have talked before about, he mentioned the reading scholarship. So Florida has this reading scholarship. It was started, I guess, maybe 5-6 years ago, and it provided $500 to students. Originally, it was 3rd through 5th grade who were struggling in reading. And the law allowed for school districts to be vendors, essentially. And so we reached out to every school district we could, and we said, hey, you can set up a tutoring program, you can do a summer reading camp, whatever you want to do, you can charge $500 and your kids can get, however many hours of reading that provides by your certified teachers. And we couldn't get a single district to do it because they're so, understandably, they are used to, we get funding from the state. This is how we do it. It was hard for them. And the same thing with the special needs scholarship. Right now, if you are a special needs parent, you can go to your school district in theory, and you can say, I really like the therapist that we use there, or I really like this teacher, and I want to be able to purchase services from you using the funds in my ESA account. And we have struggled to find districts that are willing to step outside the box and say, well, this is how much we believe this is worth. And here's an invoice, and Step Up or Merit or whoever can pay the district directly. And so I think the entire industry, the districts, I think we all are moving into this kind of new world, and may have figure out to benefit families. So I think at this point, unless y'all have anything to add, maybe we could move to Q&A.
Sounds good.
Okay, and I know my internet is unstable again, so hopefully it does not go out with this storm. There was a question by another former Step Up for Students alumni. David asked about Texas specifically, and as such a huge state and a very conservative state, because we've seen this happen in more conservative states. Could you touch on that a little bit? How likely we think Texas is to pass? And is that a voucher or is that going to be an ESA? And what does that eligibility look like?
I think those are all great questions. And I don't know that we know at this point. There have been a number of different versions of school choice policies floated out there over the last year or so in Texas, trying to come to some, agreement that can get across the finish line. If I had to guess, I would say you're looking at a more tightly tailored, maybe ESA, maybe voucher plus, where you get, tuition plus maybe some tutoring or something like that. I don't think it'll be a full-blown universal ESA program. I could be completely wrong, but I just don't know. I think, politically speaking, I think there's a need to get a win here. And I think that however that win comes for the governor and for others who have been supportive of and put their necks out on behalf of passing something, we'll want to get it done. So I don't know that I have a good answer to that at this point.
Something else that came up is we've used the term universal a few times, and I've talked about special needs. Can you or Travis or someone kind of touch on what have the eligibility requirements look like in the past for some of these programs and even before ESAs, and what does universal entail?
So I want to talk a little bit about, I guess, like kind of big picture, how our approach on that has evolved over time in Florida. So Step Up for Students, I mean, our roots go back to the Children's Scholarship Fund, Tampa, which was created by our founder and board chairman, John Kirtley, as basically this effort of how do we create a scholarship program that is going to make uh, private school tuition available to low-income families. And that is sort of where Step Up's roots lie, and that's where the roots of the school choice movement, both in Florida and nationally, really lie, is this idea of how do we provide scholarships that allow low-income families to basically exercise the same sorts of choices as families who are much more affluent. And that's where we really started in Florida. But then quickly, the other kind of set of options that we started creating were options targeted specifically at students with disabilities. And I think there's kind of a recognition that these are students who oftentimes need a more tailored and customized education. And so that started with our McKay Scholarship Program, and then with our what is now our special needs ESA. And that was where Florida got started with this more flexible parent-directed scholarship program, was working just with those families who had students with disabilities, for whom, customization just is really a lot of times essential for them to have their needs met. And so the evolution in the movement over just the past couple years has been this switch from programs targeted at one or both of those two groups, low-income families and students with disabilities, to now making it available to all families. And I think that this relates to the Texas conversation a little bit, because what that has done is shifting from low-income families or students with disabilities to now all families. You broaden the base of potential political supporters, where there's more families, more schools that stand to benefit from these programs. And that has helped in states like Iowa, potentially soon in Texas, where governors have championed these programs, made it a litmus test issue in the Republican primary. If people opposed it, a lot of them got punished in the election, frankly. Shout out to Kim Reynolds, who really kind of pioneered and flexed her muscles on that approach in Iowa. We could see a version of that in Texas. It's starting to change the political game around these programs. I think for those of us who administer these programs and have a mission to serve the families with the greatest need, it also raises this question of, now that these programs are available to all, how do you put the resources in the hands of the families with the greatest needs? And how do you make that as simple as possible, but also as fair as possible? And so I think, issues that might come up in Florida in the coming years are, what does weighted funding look like? Are there ways to put additional funding allotments in the hands of low-income families? We already have fund weighting for students with disabilities, where the more profound your disability is, the more funding you get as a parent. And that makes sense, because you might want to, for example, attend private school tuition and then also need, occupational therapy on top of that, and maybe some flexible on learning on top of that. And so, how do we kind of right size the resources so that every family has the ability to, deliver the customized sort of options that their children need, is kind of a big next step for the movement to grapple with.
Can I just add one or two things there, Sarah? I couldn't have said it better myself, Travis. I was at a conference recently where we were talking about the shift in choice over time, which began in Milwaukee as like as a way of getting really low-income students who were living in the urban core of Milwaukee out of really failing public schools and into private schools, because on average we believed that those schools did a better job of educating students. And while that is generally still true, I think the conversation around education and what parents want out of education has shifted away from just looking at a better education to a different education. And so even in Indiana, I'll mention them. They passed a career savings account this year, which is essentially an ESA for students to go and get career training services. So, maybe they're not college bound, or they don't want to go to college at this point, but they want to go take a computer coding class or some type of other class, get a skill. There's a savings account or a scholarship account or whatever you want to call it that's specifically dedicated to them going and getting that type of training. And so I think I say that to say, whether it's a traditional ESA program or whether it's these more one-off programs like reading scholarship accounts or career education accounts. What we're really talking about is empowering parents to make different decisions about how the money that is supposed to be allocated to them is spent on their child's education. And I think we'll continue to see growth in that area.
And I just wanted to quickly add, even as we're moving towards universal, one of the things that I've really liked that I've seen with a lot of our state government partners is that there's still that focus on making sure that those with the greatest need are targeted, and that they are aware of the program. And then not only aware, but once they are made aware, that it's very easy to join and it is accessible. And so I think that's where the marketing that we are talking about comes in. And then also the program administrators, I think everyone that Sarah has named really is cognizant of the fact that it's really important to make sure that these programs remain accessible for the families that need them the most.
On that note, Tay, we have a question. More specifics. Can you get into more specifics on if you are a vendor, you are interested in joining Merit's marketplace? How do you go about doing that? How long does it take? What's the process?
Sure. And so every program is going to have different rules. One of the things that we've tried to do in both Kansas and Ohio is have that information right on the website. And so right where the families are going to learn about the program, there's also FAQs, guidebooks for education service providers. You can also reach out to me directly. But if you wanted to find out, you can go to, I think probably most of the programs have information for vendors and then what the process looks like. I know that we've tried to streamline it. And so obviously there are state requirements of what a qualified vendor is. And so you upload your information. We found it's usually pretty quick and you can get approved within a matter of days. One of the things that we also try to do is to make sure that we have customer service. So if you have a question, somebody can pick it up and get that question answered. But usually the process is uploading a few forms. We also want your logo so we can set up that, the child on the education marketplace, but it's a pretty seamless process.
Thank you. Travis, do you want to add anything to that? I don't know about My Scholar Shop.
Yeah, so I mean, it does depend a little bit on what it is that you're providing. So if you're providing more of a curriculum instructional supplies, My Scholar Shop will be great. Otherwise, Step Up, we do have an option for providers who provide, for example, tutoring or who are more of a school, where you can sign up to receive payment directly. I can post some links in the chat for the systems we have set up for that.
Perfect. Any other questions? Okay, well, we may, okay, and Travis, I don't know if those links are going into the main chat, but we will send those out if folks can't see them. I'm not sure if it's just the hosts that are seeing that. We are going to send out, I don't think that they can see those, but we are going to send out a follow-up to this. We'll send out the recording of the webinar and to everyone who registered. And we're going to include kind of a summary and where you can learn more information from all of these organizations. I do want to thank our panelists for your time. We're going to give you guys back 20 minutes of your day. I hope this was helpful. Please reach out to myself. We'll have all of our contact information in that email as well, but reach out to us if you have any questions. I know everyone on our panel would be happy to talk more with you. If there's anything we can do, we'd love to do it. Thanks so much for joining. Y'all have a great day.
Thanks, Sarah.
Thank you all.